Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today I'm joined by the good old Nicolò Grasso as we begin our David Lynch December series, starting with a review for Blue Velvet. Arguably one of the most important films of Lynch's development as a filmmaker, the film follows a young man as he gets pulled deeper and deeper into the darker sides of society as he not only grows who he's going to be as a man, but also grows his understanding of the world around him and how maybe suburbia isn't quite as beautiful and perfect and clean as it seems. Look, there's no sugarcoating it. Both myself and Nick absolutely adore this film, and today it's so fun to finally break it down, get into all the nitty-gritty of why we love the film and what it means for the overall filmography of David Lynch. I'm so excited to spend this month on the podcast breaking down his incredible filmography, starting with Blue Velvet, which really might be the best film to start the series with. So without further ado, let's get to our full review on Blue Velvet. Okay, friends, and starting off David Lynch December today with Blue Velvet, we have a David Lynch expert in the room. So I'm going to actually challenge myself, and I'm going to be the one to start out today because I want to share my thoughts, and then we'll get into the beautiful, constructive, here's everything that this movie actually is about and says conversation that I'm sure Nicolò Grasso will bring us today. Technically, you did say this was your favorite film of all time when we did that countdown on Patreon. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts. Blue Velvet, I've seen, I'll just, I guess, preference this by saying I've seen most of David Lynch's stuff, probably about half. I have the ones we're covering this December on ClapperCast, and then I need to watch The Straight Story, or I believe it's called. I will be watching that probably this week to finally really catch up on this. But Blue Velvet, so I guess, again, I am a fan of David Lynch. I don't know if his stuff always, especially on a first viewing, which is what kind of terrifies me about this podcast series, is like I'm watching these the day before and then like I have to speak about them. If I was to do that with Mulholland Drive, like I would just have nothing intelligent to say in the slightest. But Blue Velvet kind of surprised me in a way, and it feels bad saying surprised because I love David Lynch. I really like David Lynch, but I love this movie. This is one of my favorite David Lynch films, like right off the bat immediately. In some ways, this feels like number one, I guess it's not his most oh god, what's the word? This film does not leave a ton necessarily up to interpretation. I think it's very clear about what it's trying to be. But when I say that, it's also trying to be so much that I was really impressed by the screenplay and the size here. So if this film follows a young kid who's living this young life, okay, you get the beautiful house, you get the kids crossing the street, the flowers, and then he learns about kind of the underbelly of his community, of his society, and the nastiness within that, which is like an incredibly effective narrative just in richness alone, because there are so many angles you can look at this film through. Number one is about American society at the time changing, and about this underbelly of what like we project as the perfect American society, and then this is a slice of it we don't talk about. Absolutely. And in that, it's kind of Schraderian. In that, it is kind of John Waters even at times, right? It's a very rich story there. Is this also a story then about growing up, about having this ideals of childhood broken up by adulthood, and coming to your own as a man and seeing kind of the negatives and kind of the grossness of life around you? Yes, that's another reading you can give this. That's great. Is this also is this Freudian, about scratching the surface of ego and about the mind and about desire? Yes, it's all there. This film has like three, and you could write an essay on any single one of these, and I'm sure there's more than just these three. These are the three that immediately stood out to me, where it's like, this film is genius. And then behind these big ideas, not only is it making these big swings, and not only is Lynch providing these big ideas that you can tackle and you can chew on, but there's so much thought put into this film and every choice. I'm sure you have, Nick. If you are at home, go look up Blue Velvet beers. The beer choices mean so much in this film when talking about these characters and developing these characters. Such a tiny, minuscule decision is used to portray something meaningful, and you can interact with it. And that's this film on every single level. I like. It's almost hard to explain. It's very Lynchian in a way. Like,
he said this.
And we're going to be, I think, probably having this conversation multiple times this month, but like, I think this film, and I've really, again, loved a lot of Lynch's stuff, and this is not my favorite Lynch. I still think Oh my God, what is his Nicolas Cage one?
Wild at Heart.
Wild at Heart is my favorite still. But this is, I think, similarly, and I think both of these film in conversation with each other is fantastic. Lynch has this thing where, like, people will call out his love for The Wizard of Oz, and you can get here with Dorothy, right? There's connections. There's that entire documentary we watched, Nick, Lynch / Oz. But I challenge that. I think that's a very reductive, almost, view of Lynch, because he's not obsessed with Wizard of Oz so much as he's obsessed with Americana. That is something that we get so many times. Wild at Heart is all about Americana. This is about American society. From what I've heard about the Straight Story, apparently that's somewhat about Americana. Like, that is something that Lynch is fascinated by clearly in his work, is the society around him and America. What is the American value? What is the American soul? I mean, it's something we see with a lot of these creators who will go out and leave their individual small towns, and they'll go and they'll see and they'll experience what Hollywood and what the film industry and what Los Angeles has to offer. Schrader did the exact same thing. This film, I think, is such a strong showcase of starting that conversation and that meditation on American society that eventually will bleed into Wild at Heart, which is fantastic. I was really, really quite blown away by this. And we'll get into specifics, obviously, everyone. But I think especially as an introduction to Lynch, which it's funny enough that we're choosing this as our first film of the series, I think this is probably the best introduction I've seen to Lynch, because it does have all this richness and it does have a lot of artistic ideals and everything you'd kind of expect from him. But the story's not only just grounded, but I think it's so baked in, like, expressive human emotion in a way that you don't necessarily have to overly work for. The performances here are fantastic. Like, Laura Dern, there's just scenes where, like, her face, and you'll just get the emotion on her face. And it's funny enough because this is also like a bunch of unknown actors at the time. Almost very similar in some ways to John Waters there also. But the emotions come through in a way that I think it really gives you a lifeline. If you get lost in the narrative and lost in this back and forth, you can always come back to these human emotions. In a way, there are Lynch films. Eraserhead, I think, is a great example, and that's very early in his career. Where it doesn't always have that lifeline. So I think if you want to engage with Lynch, you want to see what Lynch is about as a director, this film is a great example of that. And I think it's one of the most inspired Oscar nominations of all time that he got Best Director nominated for this, because, like, absolutely deserves it. I would personally probably say screenplay is a little bit stronger than direction here, but both are excellent. I was really blown away, is, I guess, the boiling it down to finally what I'm trying to say. And I cannot wait to deep dive into this film a little bit more. But Nick, as the David Lynch stan himself, what are your thoughts on Blue Velvet?
Oh man, like, I don't even know where to begin. I think I can genuinely say, first of all, I'm super happy that you love this film. It warms my heart. I was going, a bit like, oh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? How's Carson going to feel about the film? But to know that you really like this one just, like, makes me so happy. So, so happy. Because in a way, I genuinely would say that without Blue Velvet, I wouldn't be here today. Which sounds like one of those, like, big statements. Of course, life is it's a series of choices, butterfly effects, and whatnot. But I will never forget, like, I first saw Blue Velvet thanks to my history of cinema extracurricular class that I was taking in my first year of university. Professor was doing this whole bunch of, like, deep dives into 20 directors. Each class we would talk about one or two directors, and she would recommend a couple of films of theirs to watch. And so then I compiled the list of the movies she recommended, and I went through it. And for David Lynch, she recommended we watched Blue Velvet. And there were other directors that we watched. Some of them I really loved, some of them I didn't care about. But I will never forget just, like, sitting down, play Blue Velvet, blue curtains, open the screen, the sweeping, ominous music by Angelo Badalamenti starts. And I was like, oh, okay. And then, boom, Blue Velvet, Bobby Vinton, white picket fences, the roses, like you were talking about, that entire opening, the man having the stroke, the dog just trying to eat the water, camera pans down into the grass, the underbelly of the city, of society. Everything is dark, dingy, bugs are eating themselves. And then hard cut to the Lumberton USA sign. I was like, this is gonna be good. And it was a movie that I'd been meaning to watch for so many years because I had this book. And I think I mentioned it in the history of ClapperCast a few times, actually, back in the early days, called 101 Cult Movies to Watch Before You Die. Steven Schneider, I think, is the author, something like that. And on the cover of the book is Dorothy Valens singing. And I remember like seeing that image in the bookstore when I was 11 years old and being just incredibly fascinated by it, reading the book and being like, oh, Blue Velvet, oh, sounds interesting. But then I was like too young to watch it, never did. And so the first screening was genuinely special in a way that made me become obsessed with Lynch. I watched everything that he was doing. And that led me to watch Twin Peaks The Return just as a film competition opened in my university to make a short film celebrating the uni. And because I was watching The Return and I delved into Lynch, I had like the strength to actually be like, if he can make these things, maybe I can make something that can work, something that's a bit weird, a bit different, but that people like. And so, literally, without watching Blue Velvet and without Lynch, I would not be making films. I would not be here right now, probably even. So, this movie is very, very special to me in a way that very few movies ever are. And I've seen this now 10 times. I absolutely love it to bits. I almost know it by heart. I know the structure of it so well, all of the scenes. I could, I don't know, like I could go scene by scene, do one of those like episode a minute, type podcasts on Blue Velvet. Um, so yeah, no, I agree with what you were saying. I think there's so much depth in here thematically. But what I really like about Lynch is that not only it's less of a puzzle, but it's more of just a mirror into yourself. It never really feels like he makes movies where every single little piece is meant to be just this one thing and everyone has to agree with that. If you don't, you're wrong. It's beautiful that he himself just like has ideas, is very intuitive, and he just puts them in the films without thinking twice about it because it feels right. And that's where we get the meaning and the symbolism and just compelling ideas and thoughts about it. But also, it's just like a really, really fun film. It's 2 hours long. It moves like this, just like nonstop, without feeling overwhelming. It's just crazy to think that there's almost like an hour of extra footage on the cutting room floor, which absolutely deserves to be on the cutting room floor, except for one scene, which we'll get into later. But yeah, like especially considering it's beginning of December that we're doing this, it's a good bridge with Noir November as well, because it has so many of those noir archetypes that it plays with, and the Wizard of Oz symbolism that you mentioned. And I also really like just visually how it keeps going back and forth between the grungy contemporary 80s to the cleaner 50s Americana that's very much idealized even to this day, we could say. Um, so yeah, man, like love this film, absolutely love this film. And I would say it's probably my favorite Lynch, similarly probably to how for a long time Django Unchained was my favorite Tarantino, because it was the first one, because it was the special one in a way. But yeah, will it ever change? Maybe, but for me I would say like 95% of his career is 5-star films. So it's always, I love his films generally speaking. But yeah, I'm excited to delve deeper into this now.
I guess to be clear for anyone at home, when I said Nick said this was his favorite film of all time, what he did, because I don't think anyone listened to it, was he said every single David Lynch project was tied for his favorite. So when I say that every single week this month, just know that's what I'm referencing. It's not actually that Nick specifically said all these films. I think that also it's wild when you look at this film. Like you say, it constantly moves, and I was not expecting for like full on action sequences, like shootouts. The noir stuff I think is also fantastic. Anyone who hasn't listened, go check out our Fritz Lang Noir November double feature episode. But again, that's also a side of Americana that's coming out on screen. I think when we talk about like Americana filmmakers, no one talks about Lynch, which I just find very, very odd. Like a lot of people talk about Waters, and there are a series of directors who have, obviously spent large portions of their career reflecting on like the American soul and the American identity. I think Lynch is, and we're going to get to this, I'm sure, every single episode this month, but like this is such a great, I think, example of Lynch's beliefs and thoughts and ideas on that. You mentioned the cockroach scene. That's like a brilliant, just immediately, the framing of this like early film it's just like brilliant. And I also, the visuals are fantastic. The colors here are great. Obviously, when you get to the blue velvet, that's iconic. The shot composition of her singing is great. There's so much here. There's a whole romance arc. Like it's interesting how this film, in a lot of ways, eh, compared to some of the other Lynch films I've seen, at least, this feels so much more, and I don't mean this necessarily in a bad way, but it feels a lot more grounded in a way. It feels a lot more like what you would kind of expect in some ways of cinema at the time. But then Lynch elevates that with style and like a vision, a very clear vision that again he starts working on right away with the cockroach and the dichotomy there of what's underneath the city, what's on top of the city. Um, in a way that like I found very, very engaging. And you mentioned the 2 hour runtime. It absolutely flies by. There was like at no point here, and maybe it's because I just love also the character so much. I think the performances here are great. We'll get to Dennis Hopper a little bit later, but he is like so fantastic here, just as this brooding force. I think Kyle MacLachlan was great. Laura Dern, I mentioned, I love Laura Dern, and I think she's like stunning here. This was like her first real film, wasn't it? Or at least one of the first.
Or just
And
like her
the
second,
emotional,
yeah.
there are times, and this is one thing Lynch does really well is he loves performers. He loves the actors he has on screen. And there's all the videos of him on set. Oh my God, heart breaks when you look at some of them from like the newest Twin Peaks stuff, that are just iconic. You can tell he loves what he's seeing. He loves the cinematic form. But there are times where we'll just rest on Laura Dern's face, and it genuinely just like her ability to convey emotion in this is stunning, and how it just like it will just anchor the whole thing. Um, I think there's a lot here probably to get into. I guess let's start first just with what is your, I guess, reading, what captivates you the most in reading this film as far as what is most engaging to you, when it comes to message or thesis or theme. Um, what stands out to you?
As a big pervert, the entire sexual angle of the film, the entire sexual and like erotic angle of the film is incredibly compelling to me, which kind of ties into the more Freudian aspects that you mentioned earlier. Because I think I wrote an article on this, like a feature on Clapper a few years ago, maybe even, because I was so interested in it. But outside of all of, because like at the end of the day I'm not American, so all those things are just like things I read about. I said it multiple times, it all feels fake, like US are not a real place. I'm sorry, Carson, it's just in the movies. It doesn't really exist in my mind. I've been there, it still doesn't feel real. But that entire aspect of Jeffrey Beaumont being this man who is torn between two different sides of love or just intimacy, we could say. You have Sandy, who's just this beautiful girl, blonde, pure. She literally, like, oh, her introduction. There's so many scenes I love in this one. Her introduction, man, you know, complete, total pitch black darkness, and out she comes from it, just like this blinding beacon of light. She is just like virginal purity in the clearest sense possible. And on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, you have Dorothy Valens, a woman who is older, mature, sexually more experienced and mature, but also very complicated, very dark, dangerous, but also subject of immense abuse and violence, psychologically especially. And from Sandy, Jeffrey gets love, the romantic ideal of love. It's the perfect heteronormative patriarchal life. It's the lovely pretty blonde, stays at home, she's so cute, she's so pretty, oh my god, she's straight out of Greece. And then on the other side you have Dorothy, who's more into, we could say, not explicit in the film, but more like into like kinky sex, dangerous, just like primal, animalistic, that lets him kind of like explore his more physical urges. And the beauty of the film, I think, is that both sides ultimately bleed and merge into him, so that at the end he can come out a better, more grown up person. And I'm also incredibly fascinated by the way he's essentially a voyeur, which is something that is just inherent to cinema for me. you spend 2 hours, 3 hours in a screening room just like staring at people. It's the most voyeuristic art form imaginable, and we just accept it. And so to have a protagonist who is a voyeur, you spend the first act of the film, we're like, okay, like nowadays especially, we're like, oh, Cal MacLachlan, Agent Cooper, he's a good guy, protagonist, whatever. But if you don't know anything about him, like who's supposed to be, just spend the first part where, Sandy asks him, I don't know if you're a detective or a pervert. It's for me to know and for you to find out. It's just like he's a bit weird. He's a bit questionable even, and that's like where I think where I officially like solidified this instantly as an old timer for me is the scene in the apartment of Dorothy when he hides in the closet for the first time, because that entire scene is about changing and twisting the power dynamics in a relationship, sexually, especially because he's the man spying on a woman who's undressing. It's something we've seen countless times before. Usually it's played for laughs, in Porky's or whatever nonsense comedies we see. But then she sees him and she's like, okay, it's okay, he got caught. He deserves it. But then it starts getting violent and she becomes dominant in the relationship. It's like, this is a bit weird. It's a bit uncomfortable. Until we get then Frank coming into the scene that completely twists the entire relationship. And so when Jeffrey actually comes out of the closet again to leave and he has this tender moment with her, it's like, oh my God, I don't even remember how long that scene is, but in my mind it feels like it's endless in the best, most disturbing way possible, because it just keeps going and going. It's never rushed. It's so calculated, and yeah, just that entire aspect is so compelling to me, because it's something that I am interested in personally as well. It's something I want to explore more with my cinema. Is the idea of trying to find this sweet spot between more overt sexual desires with also genuine love and genuine romance. I think we are in an era of like, polyamory, ethical non-monogamy, being more open to kinkiness and whatnot. I think we are heading in a direction where potentially we will lose, if it keeps going this way in like 50 years or something, in where we will lose the appeal of just love in a pure sense. It feels like we risk becoming more detached from it. And so when you get to moments like, which is, you were talking about Laura Dern, and there's like one of my favorite scenes of this film, which I'm gonna say probably like every scene in this film. Anyway, one of my favorite scenes is when she talks about her dream in the car. You have Mysteries of Love, French horn version playing in the background, and she talks about the robins, they're gonna come, the blinding light, and they represent love, which is on paper cheesy as shit. Like, she's literally explaining the symbolism of her dream. It's a child's dream. But the way it's portrayed, the way it's interpreted and scored and shot, you want to feel what she's feeling. You want to live in a world where the robins come, where it's just like blinding light of love. Oh man, like, love it. So it's so good. This is what movies are about, man. Oh, I'm curious how you feel. What compelled you about this film thematically?
No, I love everything that you said. I think one thing that really stood out to me is I'm, if you cannot tell, kind of obsessed with like the Americana angle of this all, and I am in just like a lot of things. That's one thing I love, like Steinbeck for. I'm obsessed with Steinbeck's work
Mm.
because I think it's this amazing reflection on Americana, especially Travels with Charlie. Is like reading it now is like one of the most fascinating reading experiences you'll ever have, because he's reflecting on predicting and dealing with a changing America that's to come, that is now behind us. So you're sandwiching this like idealistic time in American history without actually having perspective from it, which I think is remarkable. That's what's out to me so much in this film. And I think even though what you've mentioned with the character of Dorothy, because immediately obviously the flashes go on of like, why is this named Dorothy, especially this character named Dorothy, which is obviously, I think, you don't name your female character Dorothy without some thought about the Wizard of Oz. Shout out Wicked, I haven't seen it yet, but um oh, and what does that mean? Because it's also a play on like, that's not the character you necessarily expect to, because you think of Wizard of Oz and Dorothy of being such a core piece of like classic Americana, let's say like classic white Americana of like, um, I assume just like really peace and love, boring white families watch that movie every Christmas.
Aw.
I don't love the Wizard of Oz, but then also the plays of like, well, what's actually the Wizard of Oz saying? It is leaving the traditional America for this bright new future. What is that actually providing? That journey, that evolution. Also, though, you can break down the character and the abuse that character suffers in the film to that of Judy Garland. And that was a really interesting angle I found in conversation, because Judy Garland went through hell, like hell on earth, making films, deeply
Oh yeah.
troubled, deeply traumatized from it, including on her making of The Wizard of Oz. But this is kind of like the thing about Blue Velvet and about the best cinema that I love is the fact that just a name of a character, I have like multiple. This is something about like Over the Garden Wall, especially, is a great example of where it's like every little thing you start to look at and you start to scratch at, and you can go down any vein with Over the Garden Wall. It's like I lost my mind going down the Dante's Inferno rabbit hole one year. Like I just went down it completely, reading Italian poetry, and I'm like, this is crazy for a cartoon show. Blue Velvet's a very similar way, where you can take any detail, the name of a character, the beers a character drinks, and you can scratch that, and you can find so much depth. It's almost like you're digging in a lawn and you find like this, cave of cockroaches, and it's like, wow, there's so much here to deep dive. But then you start thinking you can do that in any of the lawns, like you can scratch any angle of this film, and there's never a point, and so many films are like this, that people are like, oh my god, it's brilliant now, where you scratch something and it's like, oh, there's nothing really there, okay, next one, and you have to kind of know where to scratch. With Blue Velvet, it's any angle you take this film from, you can have a 3-hour conversation on. We could have a 3-hour conversation just about the politics of sex and sexuality in this film, and voyeurism, as you mentioned. You can have probably a 3-hour conversation breaking down the references to Americana and the Wizard of Oz, and what does even just the name Dorothy mean. That is, I think, cinema and a screenwriter and a director operating on like the highest fucking level of like thought and of achievement, to have something that is so rich in any angle you take. And I think that's one of the brilliant things about also a film like this and its legacy, is that as conversations evolve, as more people see the film, as more people find different areas to tackle the film from, it almost becomes overwhelming to discuss and describe what is this film about. Because at the same time, I'm kind of like a Freud stan. I'm obviously Freud has a lot of issues, but I really think like at the base of his work, I think he understands humanity on a level that I like really subscribe to. So also at the same time, I'm obsessed with all the Freudian stuff here, and the ego and the superego, and like it's all absolutely there with these characters. And when you look at it from that angle, you can't say it's not. You can't say that's just like a conspiracy theory we're putting on the film. It is undeniably, like objectively, dare I say, about that. But then when you look at it through the Americana angle, it's undoubtedly objectively about that. Every angle you look from, there's enough there to substantiate it to where it's like, and maybe this is, I don't know if this is necessarily, well, I feel like the 3 angles I presented, Lynch had to be present for and had to be very explicitly thinking about while he made this. But I think it also just speaks to like, and I would love to write an essay or something about this eventually, but like, when you put thought and craft on screen, and I feel like we've talked about this somewhat recently even, but like, you create a text that is just so naturally rich and where nothing is wasted, to where like forever there'll be endless interpretations, even ones you don't mean to have in there, that can be substantiated and can be connected and been made, because you've put that effort and again that craft in there to build real characters in a world that is often fictionalized, like Lynch's worlds are. You build stuff that is so real about humanity to the core. These characters, their desires, their fears, their egos, their intentions, those are all real to humanity in a way that humanity, I think, is often the most complex you can get when you're projecting that on screen. The natural, and that's why I love documentaries, actually. It's like so much of the real complexities of just the human condition is like far more fascinating than anything you're going to write or craft. So when you take that and you put that into your characters and you put that energy in your characters, you just create a text that is like naturally very rich. It's like I love that I'm just jumping between like every single fucking comparison you can make, but it's like when you're doing a garden, right? You want soil that has been through shit. You want soil that has seen life and seen death and like has all this built up, I don't know the word, I'm not a gardener, but like has all, you want a very rich soil that has been done all this. And then that's where the plants grow best, right? You literally throw actual shit into it to keep it healthy and keep the biome going. You don't want fresh soil. You don't want new soil. You want like established, meaningful soil. That's what you want with these characters. He gives them a rich enough soil to wherever seed you plant in it, it's going to grow beautifully. And it's something that, like, I don't know if I can say about every single one of Lynch's projects, because I think he so often gets lost. And I'm curious your thoughts, because you've seen all of his films. And again, I've not seen the two next we're talking about, so I don't know how that's going to interact with my thesis here. But I feel like Lynch sometimes in his projects gets so deep on the artistic and on the unclear and the undefined and the unrefined. Where I think this film holds itself together in a way that, like, at least for my brain, I feel like I can really engage with this film in a way. And I love this movie. This is not a shit on this film, but like, I don't know if I can engage with Mulholland Drive the same way I can enjoy and engage with Blue Velvet. I don't know your thoughts on that, but how would you compare this to other Lynch films?
Well, just as a preface, I'm pulling a Jack here now. Careful. Um, no, just to start off with what you're asking is that I think it's important to recognize when Blue Velvet came out. This was his fourth film. He had Eraserhead, which he made when he was studying in AFI back when he was still semi-small, in the 70s. That got big. Mel Brooks saw it. Elephant Man came his way. It was just like, oh, you want to get paid to direct a movie that seems interesting? Sure, I'll do it. That got like Oscar nominated, maybe even won an Oscar or two. I don't remember, but definitely Oscar nominated. Super big. Oh, who's this David Lynch guy? Is he gonna direct Return of the Jedi? Who knows? Oh, he's doing Dune, this massive adaptation for Dino De Laurentiis. It's like, yeah. Painful experience. Just like way too big, way too big. But thankfully for him, in the contract, he had the opportunity of making a smaller movie. I think it was like $7 million or something. As long as it was 2 hours long, Dino was like, David, just like do your thing. I don't care. Don't bother me. Just like as long as it's 2 hours long and on budget, it's fine by me. And he made Blue Velvet, and it's clear that this is where he truly comes into his own, where he ditches some of the more, let's say, I hate the term, but let's say more artistic tendencies that he had with like Eraserhead, which come from his background in painting and that type of classical art. Um, he doesn't have other people's projects that are like The Elephant Man, real story, Dune, the super big sci-fi novel. It's actually, his idea, something that he cares about, and that started this new part of his career, which is the one that I love, which is everything from here to the end, basically, in a way. Um, I don't know if I would fully agree in the sense that one thing that I really like about Lynch's work, which starts especially with this one, but also, I mean, even the other films, especially Elephant Man, prior to this, but he's a very emotional filmmaker. It kind of ties in what you were saying in the way that he acts on sets and reacts on sets. Like you can tell he's very much driven by feelings. And with this one, it's such a classical story told with so much emotion and power and empathy for these characters. I find it incredibly moving. I think once you get
Yeah.
to, you have Wild at Heart, which is the overt Wizard of Oz homage. You have also an adaptation, actually. Fire Walk with Me, which is fucking absolutely gut wrenching film, just devastating. Makes me cry so much every time I watch it. Straight Story, Lost Highway. You get to the point where it does feel more bitter towards Hollywood, towards the movie making process, because it's so painful. It's more painful than it should be. There's more bureaucracy and there's more nonsense that kills the artistic spirit, where you feel some of that bitterness. And I think what you were talking about with Mulholland Drive, which is kind of I mean, all the movies kind of like playing dialogue with each other in my mind. But if you want to put it together with Blue Velvet, it's almost the flip side of Blue Velvet, where Blue Velvet is the real world that enters into the nightmare. Dorothy flies away in the tornado, and Jeffrey ends deep into a severed ear. But then at the end, he comes out of the nightmare. He comes out changed. He can go on his life just as Dorothy does. With Mulholland Drive, you start in the nightmare, which is more of a dream, And then in the second half, or like latter act, you exit from the dream slash nightmare and you enter reality, which is the worst nightmare of all. And it has that jolting effect. It is more, brace yourself for Inland Empire. Inland Empire is more Mulholland Drive plus extreme avant-garde. But I would still say that it's so easy, and that's always what I feel like. For instance, I saw um, Mulholland Drive with a friend very recently in the cinema here, and he was just like confused. It was like I didn't know how to feel like throughout the movie, how to focus on things, and that's what I always say whenever someone's like, I don't know how to approach Lynch. Is just let it wash over you. Just like go with the flow, with the emotions that you're feeling, absolute dread, hilarity, confusion, fear, romance, passion, love. Just like let it wash over all of you. And I think the strength of Blue Velvet is that it is so classical in a way. It's so simple, which helps. It's stories you've seen countless times before, but never told like this. So it has that element of familiarity that keeps you engaged, we could say. And it has enough, like, spiciness, romance, a little bit of action, a bit of horror that is a bit more straightforward to kind of like keep you engaged compared to um, some of his later works, which get a bit more abstract, which get a bit more convoluted, but by design almost, and that get just way more depressing. I
Well,
never, I never say I want to watch Mulholland Drive just to be like, good afternoon, let's just watch Mulholland Drive. No, because I know it's gonna crushes me every time I watch it. I'm speechless after it. But then I can put on Wild at Heart or Blue Velvet, and you get to those endings, and it's like, woo! It's bright and it's
yeah.
light, and there's love and there's hope for the future. It's amazing.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned obviously his emotions and stuff because he also says Blue Velvet is like where he started making films based on like that were personal to him, that were meaningful to his experience in life. Not to shit on like I love Dune. I think his Dune is so underrated. Get that on Death by Adaptation immediately, please. But
We've
I
done it
do think
already.
there. Oh, have you? I wasn't there.
Early days
Oh, I'll have to
review on.
listen to that. Wait, do you like? I assume you liked Lynch's Dune, but quick side
I
note: do you like
prefer it
Lynch's Dune?
to I prefer it
Same,
to the blues
same.
actually.
Okay,
It has the
not.
Toto soundtrack. Just like kicks Hans Zimmer in the ass.
Oh, it's
Sorry.
incredible. Yeah, especially Dune part. Like, oh my god, it's great. But I think that there's also this note, and to be very clear for those at home, I really like Mulholland Drive. I'm not shitting on the film. We're putting these in conversation with each other. When you have like a 4.5-star film versus a 5-star film, it is what it is. But I think the personal side of Lynch's filmmaking and those emotions, when they shine through, I think is always what's going to captivate me more. I mean, we both have a very difference. We're like, I also hate the word artsy. I cannot think of a better word this morning for it. But you are definitely much more open to like artistic when you have an artistic canvas or a canvas that you fill really interestingly and you fill the spaces interestingly. I think that is something, and this is not a knock on you. I think it's brilliant. I wish I was like you, where you will watch a Skinamarink and you'll really like love the experience and you're like, this is awesome. Um, calm down. And
Skinamarink
then
pushing it.
well,
But I
you
respect it.
like films like that.
I
I will
like
sit there and be
it.
like, this fucking sucks. Please give me something more. And I think Lynch does a great job overall at giving more. I think this is, at least for me, and again, I'm not sounding like a broken record. We will get to the others. This one for me is probably one of the strongest at not only filling the canvas really interestingly, but also giving it to where like I can engage with this and I feel really rewarded with that on a first viewing specifically. Again, that is something with Lynch's films. You have to understand is like you're gonna have to view probably Mulholland Drive a few times before like you fully can digest it all, which is not something supported with our modern like views of cinema. I know
Disposable.
Jack never wants to rewatch anything. But like with Lynch, you kind of have to, which now makes me a little bit more nervous for Lost Highway and Inland Empire. Maybe I'm gonna have to figure out a way to rewatch them. But I think this on a first viewing, I think connects so much easier, which goes back to my idea that like this might not be his best film, but I think this is the best introduction to Lynch you can have. I'm curious if you agree with that, but I think like um I love what that film does and also represents, because it represents the start of a journey. Yes, you have
Hmm.
Eraserhead before this, and you have some films, Dune before this, and Eraserhead is obviously like an iconic film of its own right within David Lynch's filmography, right? Not to shut on that film at all, but this is the start of, I think, him. It's kind of similar in a way to Waters, not to bring this all back to Waters always, but like it's kind of like, yeah, you have Multiple Maniacs, you have Mondo Trash Show, and I love those films also. I'm not shitting on those, but like then you start to get into like where he starts to put the pieces together. You can see that evolution for better or for worse, as he builds his way towards his later career successes. Um, I feel like this is also very like Lynch hits out of the park. And one thing I love about Lynch, and we've talked about this with new directors all the time on ClapperCast, where they will have one film that they really hit out of the park. I go back to our Neil Blomkamp conversation I did with Jack last year or 2 years ago. We were just shouting the guy for an hour straight, but like you have District 9, or you have whatever that film is that knocks out of the park. In this case, it's going to be Blue Velvet. And it's like, oh, I'm so excited to see where you go next, because you prove yourself so much in your vision in this film, and they do nothing. They just have
Elysium,
nothing
whoa,
left. Elysium, Gran Turismo, it just keeps like, it's just not
Chappie.
good, y'all. Chappie. Um, and not just Neil Blomkamp, but that's something with so many directors, where they have such an interesting view and such an interesting voice, and it's so rewarding, and then they do nothing with it. With Lynch, we know with Lynch that this is the start of something. He's going to continue and evolve and give these grand displays of cinema throughout his career, and he goes up and down. You know, he has a straight story, which I believe is far more digestible than like Inland Empire, let's say. But
Oh yeah.
I love knowing that there's that substance. And I think as the start of Lynch's journey, and I don't think, again, there's a better film we could have started a David Lynch series with. That this is, I think, the start of when Lynch really starts to really sink his teeth into the possibilities of cinema and the cinematic form. And for that, I love it even more. But I think as it stands, just like on its own, I think it has everything you would want, where it's a near perfect film. But then you just also then are reassured that this director is going to continue to take risks and continue to grow in his voice and continue to grow in his output, which like even some of those things you could look at this and say, well, yeah, it's a simple story. Yeah, it's simpler. Yeah, it's more basic. And maybe those are things that some people would be really maybe more critical on. I celebrate it because I think it works well.
Mm.
I know this is not a limitation of this director, so I feel like that also gives me the ability and almost like the permission to like, yes, I love this film and I have no flaws with that. It's basicer, because I know he can get crazy and he's gonna get crazy. Um, I don't know. Do you think that this is the best? If you had to recommend, you had someone fresh, has not seen any David Lynch, would you start them with Blue Velvet? Where would you start them, and how do you kind of put this in conversation with his overall filmography?
100% yes, I would recommend Blue Velvet. I think it's absolutely the best way to get into his films. And also, like, side note, because every time you mention him, like, I need to say it because it's like contract wise, I have to say it. But like, John Waters and David Lynch, they're very good friends. John Waters pushed Eraserhead when it came out in the cinemas for those midnight screenings.
I could be completely making this up. I'm like fairly certain, because they have the actual card at the Academy Museum, that David Lynch was the one who invited officially John Waters to join the Academy. I believe
Probably,
like
yeah.
they have his Academy card that he got, and it's David Lynch who signed it. Like again, could be just completely creating false history, but I'm like 95, because I think I texted you a photo. I was like, "Your boy is supporting."
Yeah, there's an amazing photograph as well, the two of them in front of Big Boy's Burger or something like that, shaking hands. Just like, love them, good buddies. There's two of our favorites, ClapperCast favorites, we could say, in the Upper Echelon Hall of Fame. But yes, no, I would say this is probably the best way to get into Lynch, because it has everything that you want in a package that's more digestible, exactly as you said, which is not a negative. If I were to make a similar comparison, my favorite David Cronenberg film is A History of Violence, which is the beginning of the more grounded David Cronenberg, which some people say is very. It's like it's not as complex, and it's not the scanners or the video drones or existence. Like, I know, I like those films. I love some of those films as well. But there's just something about the simplicity of A History of Violence that opens up everything about the filmmaker, what he can explore. Also, speaking of Americana, that's a perfect comparison to Blue Velvet, actually, in many ways. But yeah, especially because I think like I first watched Eraserhead before I even knew who Lynch was, because it was just like, I don't know, like top 20 horror films you should watch or something. And I was like 18 or 19. It's like, ah, yes, it was something spooky. And I was falling asleep. It's like, this is scary. This is bullshit. I think you can even find maybe my Letterbox review. I think it was like that early beginning of Letterbox, like 3 stars or something. Like, ah, it's okay. But then the same year, like a year later, I watched Blue Velvet with proper context. And this was like, I get it. And I completely agree with what you said as well, that we need to give movies more of a chance, especially when it comes to rewatches. Um, People don't need to go into a screening having read a booklet. It's like, here's what you're getting yourself into, be prepared. It's not that. But having a little bit of just understanding of what you're getting yourself into, and also being open to just admitting, like, yeah, it's not the right time, like, or the right mindset or whatever. Like when I first watched, and we'll get properly deep into that, Inland Empire wasn't the right time when I first watched it. I was like, oh, I think it was October. Like, I still haven't seen this Lynch film. October is gonna be scary. It's like 3 hours of artistic nonsense for me at the time. I was like, what is this? But then rewatching it, knowing what I was getting myself into, is far more rewarding. And I think with Blue Velvet, because it's more classical, because it uses such familiar iconography and plays with it, and especially something that's always very underrated with Lynch, very rarely gets mentioned, and I have to do it. It has a lot of humor in it that's very effective, very, very effective. I kid you not, it took me, I think, like 5 screenings, 5 viewings of this film to understand the entire deal with Blind Al, I think is his name, or like the owner of the shop. But I was like on the first viewing, I was like, yeah, how does he understand those things? And that's when, like, later on, I realized, oh, the guy's just patting him on the back with the fingers. Just like little details like that, but it's such a funny dynamic for characters that are in literally 2 scenes, 3 scenes of the film. Aunt Barbara, who she's gonna get it if she doesn't shut up. You know, all those little side characters, and we haven't talked about, it's crazy. We come 45 minutes if we haven't really delved into him yet. Frank Booth and his entire crew of misfits, of scoundrels, of gangsters, of bikers, whatever you want to call them, which also has like absolute legends. What's his Brad Dourif and Jack Nance are part of it, and it's like, just like the weirdest, creepiest guy you can have, just like being there as set dressing, and it's the best set dressing I've ever seen. Um, the the movie, I think it reaches that like high point early on with the Dorothy Valens attack, which is like, okay, like, it's okay, the movie's going in this direction. But then when Frank Booth is introduced and Dennis Hopper is just swearing a mountain storm of like, I there's a fuck every 5 lines or something like that. It's so vulgar, it's so loud, it's so like, it's so outside of anything we've seen in the movie up until that point, that it completely adds new life and a new level of fear and danger and excitement as well in this film. Because you get into this, like, it's constantly like this. It's so well paced and so well written. Like you said, with the screenplay, it's a very great screenplay because it has this, crescendo, reaches this peak, and then it just like changes direction. Okay, Frank Booth has been introduced. We're learning more about the mystery. What's gonna happen? Oh shit, Frank actually catches Jeffrey at Dorothy's place. We're going for a joyride, neighbor. And they go around, and that entire sequence is insane. Which is even crazier that they actually had an extended introduction to the bar layer of where Dean Stockwell stays, where Ben stays. This is it, which is also another funny gag. This is it. And what's the sign on the bar? This is it. It's just like, ooh, amazing. But yeah, they had like this thing with like naked pool players or something, some BDSM. Yeah. It was a bit more out there. Instead, in the final film, it's just like, we are here at the bar. Oops, we are in the apartment upstairs, and that's it. Which works perfectly fine. We didn't need that. I mean, it would have been cool. You have the scenes if you want to watch them, but they're not needed. They're not necessary. And that scene, man, like, And that was the moment when I wanted to watch the film after we saw in class just like one scene from this movie. It was the in dream sequence. Dean Stockwell picking up the lamp, singing Roy Orbison, lip syncing to Roy Orbison, Frank getting emotional and then just like angry out of nowhere, which is also something that I really like. And then I'll let you speak because I'm getting carried away here. I'm sorry. But that's one thing that I really like about Frank that could potentially play. We're talking about themes, meanings. We could have an entire conversation just about a potential queer reading of this movie with frank homosexuality and just like gender roles outside of just like sex itself and intimacy. Um, but the fact that you have this violent man, brutal man, criminal, mastermind who puts on disguises to have this like really convoluted plans in his head to get away with some crimes, who just like weeps so softly and so tenderly listening to a woman sing Blue Velvet. Something as simple as that. It humanizes him to a point that makes him more disturbing, which is something that we've seen a thousand. Like if I got a euro, a dollar for every time someone says you're just like me in a movie, like the villain says it to the protagonist or something, I'm gonna be rich because it's in almost every movie that has a conversation with a good guy and a bad guy. But in this film, it's so earned because Jeffrey could go in this direction. Jeffrey is attracted by this darkness, by this evil presence. Um, but yeah, no, I'm curious how you feel about Frank and this mommy complex.
I was gonna say exactly what you just mentioned. I love the character of Frank. I think Frank is fantastic. I think the
Yeah,
performance is great. But I think he plays so incredibly well. Again, which angle are you gonna look at this film from? Because Jeffrey is at the stage and it's about growing up where like he's gonna figure out who he is as a man, who is he gonna be, um, and he so easily, and you totally understand why he could become Frank in a heartbeat. This could be who Jeffrey is, which I also think is like wildly rich when you look at like modern politics and the modern state of men and who men decide to follow. There's so much there, and then also contrasting that with like everyday America and what is this providing that everyday America doesn't. Then you get into to complete the trifecta here, like Schrader's hardcore, and that's baked into a lot of Schrader's, and actually that's baked into a lot of Waters' filmography, which is like this: you why do you want to be with Cecil Demented? Why do you want to be with these characters in these underground having fun rather than with rich society of Baltimore, right? I think he plays so incredibly well there. I think Dennis Hopper's performance again is just like really not just like intimidating, because there are scenes where like, especially when you first introduce him, where it's like it's genuinely quite uncomfortable. You feel like you're in the closet like witnessing this like yelling and you're like, oh god, this is like very uncomfortable. He's also very funny. Like he's just a very fun character in every way that I think really again, it's like it'd be so easy to write Frank in just one certain way. I almost feel like comparing this to like the Wachowskis Bound in a way, because the introduction of him feels very similar to an introduction within that film. But this character is so much more complex because I think Lynch gives him so much more complexity and so much more humanity. You mentioned him weeping, him crying, that emotion. It's in that, it's in the humor, it's in every side of it. Again, this character feels so alive and you feel so but that's the point in this film also though, is right, like it wouldn't work because Jeffrey is not going to become a monster. Jeffrey's just going to become a human, and that's important to explicitly show that Frank is a human also. Again, it's one of those parts where again, if you scratch at it, it's just in any direction, like yeah, it's all there because the character is so strong, the characterization of him is so strong, the human side of him is so strong and so feels so authentic. I love the character. And it is wild that again we spent 45 minutes and we didn't mention him really because he's such a key part in this film. But you can do that with like any little thing. We also haven't even really mentioned the ear, right? The hole into the underground, which I
the
love Lynch's
inciting
quote.
incident of the film.
Right, like the key incident. I also love Lynch's description of that. Like, well, we needed some hole into the body. And what does that say about Freud? What's that like? That works in all levels, right? Like
Deep
that you
hole,
have
just
this
go deep in.
hole. It's incredible. It's a really good looking ear. Also, take that Gladiator 2 in your fake head. But it's really Well done. I'm curious though, because you mentioned that there is at least one. I know there are deleted scenes. Good old King Jack Luke Sharp was gonna watch all of them before this, didn't make it. But what scene you mentioned there was at least one scene that you wish was in the film? Which one? What's that? Because I have no idea what are in these deleted scenes.
They are. I mean, there's a lot more. Okay, there's multiple scenes that I think are just nice on their own. We don't need them for the movie itself, but there is an extended, which is great. Like you watch the movie now, it's like, yeah, of course, this is the movie. It's meant to be like this. There is an extended prologue. Did you know this? We are at University College with Jeffrey Beaumont at a party, and he sees two people sneaking out, and he goes and he spies on them, and it's like, oh, this guy and this girl, they're making out, and then he gets a little bit rough on her, and Jeffrey steps in, and he's like, you stop, you bad guy. And the guy is like, oh, fucking weirdo, you're watching at us, what? Ugh. And then he goes out, and Jeffrey, there's a call for you. Oh, dad is gotten sick. Oh shit, have to leave college now. And that's when he would Lamberton, USA, Jeffrey, he's back home. It's like all of that. You have more scenes of him talking with his aunt and mother. You have which are like yeah, take it or leave it. Um, but there's like a scene where he's in Sandy's house together with her boyfriend to spend some time together, which is when the guy gets to meet him, and it's like, oh, there's a little bit of tension there, but it's like we don't need it. You have this beautiful moment of the guy just like doing practice. It's like, Sandy, hey, oh no, oh, other guy, oh, I'm sad now. Just like simple. That's all you need. I don't even remember his name, honestly. Such like a uh, unnecessary, like pointless, not important character. But a scene that I really like, it's with there's like a couple more scenes with Jeffrey and Dorothy, and there's especially one when they're actually on the rooftop of the building, which is a nice change of scenery. It also adds this extra layer of like freedom and space and thing that actually takes away, I think, from the oppressiveness and almost like magic of that apartment. Where she talks about some of her feelings and that she's also considered suicide. Beautiful performance, very heavy. I think that's a scene that could have probably benefited being in the film of all the ones that they've cut. But I don't know if they're available. They're definitely in the Criterion, both the previous version and the 4K. There's a fan editor who loves Lynch called Q2, who's made some excellent ones with Twin Peaks, who has made like an extended cut of it, which I saw for the first time earlier this year. I'd already seen the scenes outside of context, and watching them in context, it's incredibly awkward. It just doesn't, because the pacing is different. The editing is like all over the place. It's so slow. It's closer to late era Lynch in a way, but putting it in the context of like 1986 Lynch, getting close to like the Mary Sweeney editing as well and stuff, like doesn't really work. But yeah, I think that's also a testament to just the way this is edited and put together, that you have so many scenes that expand characters, that make explicit things that are implied, things that you already feel inherently on an emotional level. Um, and it's so powerful. And even to this day, like I love this movie, number one favorite film of all time, honestly. I'm still kind of confused by Frank's plan with the dressing up bit. I'm still like, every time I watch it, I'm like, what are you trying to do, Frank? It's like you're trying to manipulate the situation. Does the guy not recognize you? Is it just in case you're being spied on, which is exactly what happens? I don't know why. The sharp dressed man, you know, whatever. But it's fun that also, like, even with that, you have those little twists with the yellow dressed man, who's actually, fuck, he's actually the police officer. He's the buddy of Sandy's father, who's also a police officer, and didn't see him the first time because the guy was outside. What? Like, it's funny how small little moments like that are just peppered throughout the film to just keep your interest going and engagement. If anyone's like feeling a little slowed down or a dull moment, it's like, no, poof, back up, twist, reveal, scene, thing happening. It's great. Love it.
I'm curious because this was not edited by Lynch. This was edited by Dwayne Dunham, who did this Wild at Heart, and he did Twin Peaks, and then he randomly did Return of the Jedi. I don't know why, but and then he's done like nothing else outside of that list. Do you have any preference between when it's Lynch doing the editing himself, like he'll do with later stage career, versus someone else taking a hand at it? Because I think it's interesting that like naturally for me, the two films at the top, and again, have not seen all of them, but like as of right now, the two films I have at top are the ones that Dwayne edited. I think in the editing is like the one of the brightest parts of both those films.
I don't. I was actually. Let me just like. I think there is always. It's a double-edged sword to have a director be his own editor, their own editor, because you have, and it's something that I do. Like I've always edited all of my projects. You could talk to people that are helping me out now as assistants with Never My Love. That Nick, some things are a bit too out there. You need to be like slowed down a little bit from doing some weird things. And with Lynch, he really, if you see behind the scenes footage and things like that, especially from The Return, he really likes to just take his time feeling a place, living a place, getting dreamy, like to get dreamy in it. When you have movies like, Your Wild at Hearts and whatnot, they are very, like conventionally edited. There's never a point where you go. I mean, there are artistic choices, which is not what I'm saying. I mean, like pacing wise, it's a good film, it's a classic film. Go to the cinema, you watch Blue Velvet, you watch Wild at Heart. Maybe the content is weird, but the way they're put together is just like natural. But then you get into something like Inland Empire, Mulholland Drive, a bit little less so, but especially like from Inland Empire onward, with his more like properly artistic projects, and then The Return. You have so many scenes that play out primarily in wide shots, a lot of moments where you have characters like going from point A to point B in a room without cutting, just like letting it flow. And you have the ambient sound that's just like droning and like, oh, it's building this oppressive atmosphere. Or moments where it's just letting the emotions run free forever because it's so empowering. Or moments of chaos that turn into fun ones, that turn into horror. There's a couple of those in The Return. I think I prefer that because it feels more artistically free and artistically true to himself. I think a great exercise that people can do, listeners, you as well, Carson, once you get into Twin Peaks by the year 2040, um, is to watch Fire Walk with Me and then watch the deleted scenes, which are called the missing pieces. You watch Fire Walk with Me, edited by Mary Sweeney, who made Lost Highway, all those later films. They were married as well, side note, for a while, for like over a decade. You watch those films and they're like a bit more intriguing and different, editing wise, pacing wise. But then you get to see the missing pieces, which Lynch himself edited, and it is straight out of The Return, which is so fascinating because it's same director. He shot those scenes. He didn't like shoot them new and fresh. They were already shot in 1991. But the way he edits it is so different from how she edited it. I think it's perfect for Blue Velvet, though, because it's so, again, going back to just the influences, which also he barely talks about it. Lynch sometimes speaks as if he doesn't watch a movie any like he's never seen a motion picture outside of Wizard of Oz, and it's such a wonderful life. But you can tell he knows his cinema, his classic cinema at least. He cares about those influences, and this one, like it opens with the Angelo Badalamenti soundtrack. Also, first collaboration, one of many that we were blessed with. R.I.P. Another beautiful musical collaboration, Julie Cruz, who sings the main song, Mysteries of Love, which is a fun little Call Me By Your Name connection. Bless her as well, R.I.P. She would have been 68, I think, today or yesterday, actually, by the time of recording, which is a sad anniversary. But anyway, like those moments are straight out of classic cinema. And I think that's ultimately what I really love about this film is that it feels classic in a way that's not just, oh man, I love this film, it's so good, I want to watch it again, but also just like this fits so well with the canon of cinema, of everything that came before and the things that will come after. It's a proper classic, which I cannot honestly, even though I love this film and I also love others. I don't think I could say for some of his other films. I wouldn't be able to say Wild at Heart is a classic. I adore Wild at Heart to bits. I would never say it's a classic. That's like cult classic maybe, for a very weird cult that I'm glad we're both part of. But cult classic indeed. But yeah, no, I still think the editing here is effective.
Yeah. Um, I'd agree with that. I'm curious to see more of Mary Sweeney's. It's interesting because I kind of assumed that her editing style would have been closer to his, considering obviously they were married. I think that means like she's probably gonna mostly have Lynch's vision. Also, like Lynch immediately then takes over as editor for Inland Empire, whereas just credited as himself. So it's interesting to hear that they had different editing styles. I've not obviously seen Inland Empire, so we'll get there and talk about the editing there. Um, but super interesting to talk about. I agree with you though. Like even though I prefer Wild at Heart, I do think this is the one I would say is like if I was hosting that film class and I was like, okay, 20 directors, what are we watching for Lynch's film? It would be this. I hope more people check it out. I feel like uh it's odd because in every review, and it was like really funny there for a second when it was true. People don't do it anymore because we memeified it so much. Even though everyone is quick to call everything Lynchian in their review, it's weird how little people talk about the career of David Lynch. Like they talk about some films. Eraserhead gets mentioned, Elephant Man gets mentioned, and a great
Mulholland
performance there,
Drive.
obviously. Mulholland Drive gets mentioned a lot. That's the big one. Um, I don't hear people talk about Blue Velvet. I don't people talk about Lost Highway or Inland Empire. Um, Straight Story. I hear Straight Story a little bit, but like I hope because I think Blue Velvet, especially, just sticking to this film because that's what we're talking about now. Like this film has so much to break down, and I would love, and maybe I'm just oblivious to these articles that exist. I obviously don't read everything film criticism wise, but like there are so many essays, and I wish like what a fun Clapper if this was like 2020 Clapper. I would be like, oh, we should have a series where we all write our own essay on Blue Velvet and then publish it. Like that'd be so fun, and we get like 10 different takes on Blue Velvet. Um, I think the film is so rich that I think it demands in some way a conversation, and it demands to be talked about. And I want to talk about the film, but I just don't feel like it happens.
I have a theory about it, which comes more from years together with you as well. I mean, you're more in it and were more in it than I ever was. Or just like the film Twitter cinephile bubble kind of thing. It's just not cool in the sense that you watch Blue Velvet. It's what you said in the opening, kind of. You watch Blue Velvet, you get it. Okay, that's easy, easy. You're a kid, you're a child. You like the film that everyone gets. Go away. Inland Empire, though. Lost Highway, though, man. The Mobius strip. It's the symbolism in that film. Oh, you didn't get it? Poor you. I got it like half hour into the film. It's like that type of mentality, um, which kind of pains me because there's so many films and so many directors where there's the one like, for instance, I know you're not actually the biggest fan of it in a way, but I do genuinely love The Godfather, and it's one of those films that feels like, oh well, fucking course, The Godfather, one of your favorite films, and I'm like, actually, yeah, like watch the fucking Godfather. I was like, it's a fucking amazing film. It's perfect. It's so well made and everything. Like it just flows by. And I think it's the same with Blue Velvet. It could be so much easier to, you know, jump on the bandwagon of those that are like favorite Lynch, Inland Empire. I don't understand anything after 20 viewings, but it's perfect because of that. It's like no. Like I like, despite being a fan of the avant-garde and the experimental, at the end of the day, I do like a good story. I do love the emotions, and I am an emotional artist, emotion driven filmmaker. Um, and I watched Blue Velvet, and for me, it's a perfect film in that sense, and it is my favorite Lynch because it's so like, yeah. Like, oh, okay, I could understand the story following it A to B without having to like think about it too hard. Perfect, amazing. It's like, does that make it a lesser film? No, and I think it's probably because of that one of the main reasons, at least, why it's not as talked about as some of his other films. It's not the underseen one because it's like, oh, it was popular back then. It had all of the controversies with the That's an article waiting to happen, like the misogyny related to the release of Blue Velvet. Side note, can I go into this mini tangent if it's okay? um, Roger Ebert famously hated this film. It took him like 20 years to actually like it, and he said that it was incredibly offensive to Isabella Rossellini and the legacy of her parents, which were, of course, Roberto Rossellini and Ingrid Bergman, not the first people to come to work in the film industry. And she was like, "What are you talking about? Like, I did this movie knowingly, willingly. I'm fine. I'm not embarrassed or anything. I'm not ashamed." And the Venice Film Festival made some sort of, like, if it wasn't a public statement, they said some bullshit also similar to this, like, oh, it's disgraceful and whatnot, to the point that Lynch said, okay, fuck you, I'm never bringing a movie to your festival. And he did. He only came for one time, and it was Inland Empire, because they gave him the lifetime achievement. It's the only film he's ever brought to Venice, because they treated him as like this exploitative porn director for having Isabella Rossellini like be stark naked and beaten and battered, which is taken straight out of. Not only is it an incredibly powerful moment, we often talk about like great composition in films. It's like, oh, that shot looks so beautiful. That's an instance of purposely having a shot with a composition that is uneven and that jolts you, because you have wide shot, Jeffrey and Sandy on the right, the bullies and their boyfriend on the left. They come out of the cars, and there's like this negative space that's a bit uncomfortable. It's like, why are we seeing that part as well, David? Why are we seeing that? And then just like out of the darkness, the opposite of Sandy from the beginning of the movie, out of the darkness comes Dorothy Valens, stark naked, beaten, bloodied, and there's no close up until like a few seconds in, until every character is aware that she is there, and you just see this figure coming out, and it's incredibly unnerving and disturbing.
I'm number one. I'm say I'm happy that you mentioned experimental, because that's what I mean when I say artistic. This entire time, please edit that. I think it's interesting not to go back to what you were saying about this film being a little bit basic, because I think that's such like a false curse, like a false statement to make on this film. Because yes, it's digestible, we can follow the plot, but like this film is wildly rich in like things you can break down, and it's not something where you can watch this one time and just be like, oh, that's what this film is about. There's so much more here. Do I feel like if that's your takeaway, you're not engaging with cinema? And not to like attack people who never made this argument and did not say these things. So very clear, projecting this towards imaginary people. But also, I know people who've seen Mulholland Drive and love it and saw it one time and was like, it was so weird, and then hear them discuss films that are also very experimental, and their level of like what's the word, I'm trying to be kind, their level of intellectual takeaways and
Okay.
conversation ability to converse on those films are like embarrassing. It's like they have nothing to say. They just like that it's weird. So I think it's very interesting. And I think this is something that happens. Yes, is that if you move away, the more experimental, the more, again, like in 2020, like this was like the conversation. But God, I feel so old being like that. It used to be the conversation. Now it's different. But there is a takeaway that if you're super weird and super experimental, that somehow equals better or being good versus something that is more straightforward and narrative. But number one, if you cannot engage with it and you cannot have a conversation about it, then what's the fucking point? AKA, mostly not even on the film, but on the person viewing it. If you're not in the space, you're not willing to actually discuss the film, and you're just like, it's so good because it's weird. And you come on a podcast reviewing the film, and it's asked, what do you think about the film? You're like, it's so weird, it's so good. And you're like, well, what's it about? And you're like, I don't know, it was so weird. It's a joke. But more so than that, even like, then to automatically say, and again, no one made this claim, I want to be very clear. I'm not like trying to gaslight everyone and say that this is what film Twitter says per se. But look at a film like Blue Velvet and be like, well, it wasn't so weird. But like, there's so much here if you actually engage with the material that, again, literally, and I'm understanding this is not going to be a 5-hour conversation, thank God. But like, we're not Uncut Gems. But you could have a 5-hour conversation breaking down any side of this film, and like, that makes this film so worthwhile. And just to say, because it's a more traditional narrative, and also because like I think it's really stupid because the film is so purposefully, I think, obviously using, it's kind of like when people watched Bros and they were like, oh my god, it's just such a basic romantic comedy. It's like, no, well, number one, that's the fucking point of it. Like when films can use traditional narratives and use traditional genre pieces and use traditional seeming characters to explore something deeper or have a point to them that is more worthwhile than just being a generic film. Yes, this movie has some of the foundation and some of the blueprint of a more traditional feature than compared to Eraserhead, compared to Mulholland Drive. But the conversation here is so rich and it has so much on its mind to engage with. I don't know. Again, no one said that, so let's be clear. But I don't know. I just think it's like childish. I think it's a childish way to view cinema. To then, because I guarantee you that like those people who are like, I love Mulholland Drive, it's so Lynchian. 95% of them, you get on a podcast talking about Mulholland Drive, and they'll have no fucking clue what to say or talk about anything outside of like they watched one video essay liked by Jim Cummings, and then like they'll be like, what's about? I guarantee you that's how it is. That's those people.
Bless
So, and
them.
not to be like I'm so enlightened compared to them, but just like that's how it is. Like I've had these conversations, right? So like it is frustrating. Because also I think why I get angry at that is not because of me or because of my time or whatever, but like you have a film then like Blue Velvet, and obviously Blue Velvet, it's fine, right? Lynch is doing okay. I don't think I need to really, fully put on the boxing gloves to defend David Lynch, but ultimately then it's a disservice to cinema like Blue Velvet that it gets overlooked. And then even worse, that's a disservice with that mindset to like new releases that would be like Blue Velvet that have incredibly worthwhile things to say and thoughts and meditations to explore. And they get overlooked for films that maybe don't, just because they take a more experimental style, or even those experimental films that don't really get the conversation they deserve because it's just like 25-year-old white kids in New York City who are like, oh my God, I love it. It's so A24 and Lynchian coded. Like it's a disservice to film.
So accurate.
Yeah, shout out all those people. Love you all. Hope you subscribe to Clappercast. But I don't know, I get frustrated by that reading. That again, I want to be clear, no one said. So I'm not arguing against anyone specific, just Nick's imaginary people, but I hope that's not the case. But I think that all comes from a point, boiling it down, that I love Blue Velvet. Blue Velvet's a great film. I probably have to bump it up to 5 stars. I had it at 4.5.
Let's
I think I do have to bump it up
go.
to 5. Again, probably I would say the best start to a David Lynch series that you can have. And now I'm like so incredibly jazzed to continue this exploration. Before we get to anything coming, Nick, do you have anything left you would like to say about Blue Velvet in our closing thoughts?
I just love this film. I watch it every time I'm about to make a new short film. It just inspires me, motivates me. If I'm even able to have like 1/50th of the quality that Blue Velvet has in any of my films, I would consider myself a very happy filmmaker, and I can die happy. It's so good, and especially because it's a film made up of such little moments. Um, yeah, like I could make a whole list of like little details in this film that I love. I'll save you from it. Um, because of this film, the first time I was in the UK living by myself with my flatmates, and we go out to buy beer in the store, I go, oh, Heineken. Let me just get a Heineken. It's because of this film that I started making films. I owe so much to it, and it still delivers, which is crazy. I've seen this movie 10 times over the past 7 years, and I'm still like enjoying every minute of it. Final shout out just to the music. I've mentioned that before, but I'll say it again. I cannot understand how great the soundtrack is here. Not my personal favorite by Badalamenti, because he only got better and bigger with Lynch in the future. Of course, Twin Peaks. Wild at Heart doesn't have that much of their music, but like Straight Story, I fucking love that soundtrack so much. But especially Mysteries of Love, the way it's played, it's like during the first dance and during the climax of the film. It's so gentle, it's so simple, it's so dreamy, as Lynch would say. With my favorite version being the French horns one, which plays during the dream of Sandy when she was recounting it. Oh man, oh man, with so many moments we talked about. I could just like list all the moments when they got back
Yeah.
go back home to Sandy's house with Dorothy. He put his disease in me. It's like, oh god, woof, woof. Sandy like ugly crying. I love her run. You know when she's running to save Jeffrey. Oh, Jeffrey, amazing. Love it, love it. The entire climax of this movie, which is just perfect, just perfect. It's this perfect circle, drawing it back. Dennis Hopper going around the apartment. The fucking radio, dipshit. So good, so good. Love it. I don't know, Carson, if you have final thoughts or if we go into our question of the week, but yeah, thank you for doing this. Any chance to talk about Lynch and especially Blue Velvet is a gift.
No, I'm happy you could be here. I texted you. Well, obviously we're doing the series. You were like, we should do Lynch, and I was like, I agree. But I felt weird picking one film. But it was like in like, let's say August or September. I texted you. I was like, hey, FYI, like, just you're free in December, right? Like, I think you're gonna. I think we really want to make sure you're free this December. And I'm thrilled. This is the point of ClapperCast. Not to get like reflective on it, but like, I love that this is pushing me to see cinema and talk about cinema that I haven't seen. Like, obviously I've wanted to finish David Lynch's filmography and now we're doing it, and like I'm incredibly jazzed right now to be doing this series. So I'm very excited that you, Jack, Randy is going to be joining us. We have some other guests. They're all going to be joining us to discuss Lynch because it's so rich, and I think this is a wonderful start to our David Lynch December. Obviously would recommend you watch Blue Velvet. It is widely available in the US. I know it's streaming for free even on Pluto TV and Tubi. I'm sure it's on Criterion Channel at times. I know there's a point is this film is very available. Check it out if you get the chance. Let's go to our question of the week. We're asking about Dennis Hopper. What is your favorite performance of his from his career? Is it Blue Velvet? Is it another film? Nick, take it away. What is your favorite performance?
This was ended up being harder than I expected, because I didn't realize how much I actually really like Dennis Hopper as an actor, and I still haven't seen some like big, well, not like super big, but like some big titles from him, like Out of the Blue, Waterworld. I doubt Waterworld would qualify as one of his best, honestly. But he was a true artist who went very deep into the drug scene in the late 60s, and who ended up, cleaning himself up during the 70s and then came back with Blue Velvet, actually. It was the double feature of Blue Velvet and River's Edge. River's Edge, underrated film with Keanu Reeves and what's his face, the weird guy. I'm blanking on him. Whatever. Good film. I would recommend it. But it was like I like this double feature in '96 that kind of brought him back into the mainstream. I have kind of like bit of a cheat Nick, classic Nick, because there's three different layers of Dennis Hopper that I really like. For the more, let's say, dramatic Dennis, love him in The American Friend, where he basically plays Ripley from Talented Mr. Ripley. It's an adaptation of one of the Patricia Highsmith books. Great film by Wim Wenders. I would highly recommend it, with an excellent Bruno Ganz in it. For a more unhinged Dennis Hopper, I mean, Apocalypse Now, he has a very good character in that one. But Speed, he plays the bad guy in Speed, with the deformed hand. It's like pop quiz, hot shot. It's crazy, crazy good, terrifying villain. So it's like chewing the scenery with so much glee. But lastly, a smaller character is basically like two scenes in the film, but who stands out. Dennis Hopper playing, rare case of playing like a good person. True Romance, plays the father of Christian Slater, and he has an iconic scene with Christopher Walken. Have you seen it actually, Carson? True
No,
Romance.
I'm not.
I'm not gonna say anything more. He has an icon. People who've seen it know that moment. Probably the best scene in the entire film. Some of the best writing by Tarantino. Great direction by Tony Scott. But yeah, the way Walken just plays this police officer, father of Christian Slater, and trying to defend him. Woof, good man.
I originally thought you were going to bring up The Other Side of the Wind, and I was like, "Wow, what an inspired choice, Nick." Dennis Hopper playing Dennis Hopper, wild film. I will say, and this doesn't necessarily seem like a Carson Timar film for my answer. This is very Uncut Gems. Cannot believe Uncut Gems haven't done Easy Rider. I love Easy Rider. Dennis Hopper's also
Oh
directing
wow.
this. Again, I love this concept of Americana and breaking down what is this weird fucking country that is America and the society that lives there. Easy Rider is such a fun film, such a great look at masculinity. Great directing, great screenplay, but Dennis Hopper in it especially. I mean, obviously, it's like when you're directing the film and you're also starring in the film, you have a pretty good idea of what you want that character to be, but it's so well realized. But also, I have not seen a ton of Dennis Hopper's work, to be honest. I have not seen Waterworld. I haven't seen Speed even. So, like, I do appreciate him in Texas Chainsaw Massacre too. I'll say, you know what? He is somewhat iconic in the Super Mario Bros. Movie. I wouldn't probably say he's a great performance there, but he's kind of iconic there. But for me, it has to be Easy Rider. I think that's a fantastic film. So with
Nice.
that, Nick, let's go to our rapid reviews. Anything we've seen recently that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll go first. Why not? Because for one of the last times, I'm not going to review everything. It is award season week. So a lot of new releases, but then we're going to get into some other stuff later. But I finally watched Sean Baker's Anora. Way better than his last film. I was still a little bit mixed on this. I loved everything when it was her and her boyfriend, and she's fantastic in this. Her and her husband, I guess I should say.
Oh,
The little bits of intimacy. I think you mentioned how you can read the points of intimacy, and something at the end is very different than the rest throughout. All that's great. I loved whenever it was that. When it spends an hour and like a half in the middle of just her and these annoying people going from like restaurant karaoke, I was like, shut up. It was like a
no.
it's more Safdie brothers than Sean Baker at times, but in a way that I was just like, yeah, I got it at first, and then it just started to really annoy me. It was fine. I definitely did not hate this film, but it's definitely middle of the road Sean Baker for me. I watched Heretic, which I like really enjoyed. I think the first half is like amazing. Second half, good, but throughout, Hugh Grant is giving like performance of the year. Like he is so fucking good in this movie. I don't know if you've seen this one. You should check it out. A religious thriller, not even a religious thriller. These two Mormon girls are going to this house Hugh Grant's house. And Hugh Grant was like, oh, I want to learn more about your religion. And they start engaging in this big conversation about religion. Again, when it starts going more towards the end into the more horror elements, I feel like it starts to lose momentum. But the first half is like, it's funny, it's scary, it's tense. There's some great reveals. Highly recommend Heretic overall. I watched Conclave, which was super fun. Really like this one. Great performances, great ensemble in this film. Interesting ending. I would love to talk with people about the
Oh
ending because
yeah.
I know you watched it, but I enjoyed
Oh,
Conclave a lot. Pablo Larraín, I watched Maria finally. Angelina Jolie gives like performance of her career here. A little bit less dynamic than like Spencer specifically. Still, I would say a little bit less than Jackie. But if you go in expecting like Spencer's vibe, very much so not in this film. But great production value, and I still enjoyed it quite a bit. We Live in Time kind of broke my heart. Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh, Andrew Garfield especially, is so good in this film. I was not a big fan of The Goldfinch. I fucking adore Brooklyn. But John Crowley creates like this beautiful little film here. Have you seen this one?
I'm watching it soon, so I'm sure it's
But
gonna
you, d- but
destroy
you
me.
did see Robert Zemeckis's here, right?
I did.
Okay, we'll get there. Comparing these two films, because they almost suffer somewhat from similar issues at times, because it's both very non-linear in a similar way, where you're
Oh,
jumping around like periods in their relationship, and sometimes that can be like a whirlwind, but overall it built to a really emotional story. But putting those two in conversation with each other is quite fun. I watched Mike Leigh's Hard Truths. Amazing lead
ah,
performance in this film, somewhat exhausting at times but still very funny, bleeding into like a very emotional ending about this woman who feels like no one is there for her. She has to do everything on herself, and where that portrays very comedically as she's yelling at her son or yelling at her husband or yelling at just random people at the store, being like a full-on Karen. It boils down to a really moving truth, it feels like, at the core of this film that I really appreciated.
the
Amy
hard
Adams
truths.
Night, yeah, a hard truth, exactly. um Night Bitch fucking sucked. That's also about that atrocious. A Real Pain was good. Didn't fully work for me, but I think the two performances are very good. The final new release I'll mention, Luca Guadagnino's Queer. We're gonna have a space where we talk fully about this film later, so I'm not gonna get into it all. 5 stars. Did not expect Nick. I don't know what we were on like a year or two ago when we did our John Couture series, because that is just now becoming like the most relevant thing we've ever done. This film you cannot engage with properly unless you know the works of John Couture, because this is Luca doing John Couture at times, and like the fact that nobody's mentioning that because no one knows who that director is. But I literally was on like in Burbank on the edge of my seat screaming when they started playing like Orpheus in the film. I was like, oh my god, this is crazy,
Yo,
this is insane.
it's
Highly,
full
highly
circle.
recommend.
It's full circle. It's
Full
kind
circle,
of like
literally. And we'll talk about it fully later,
ClapperCast.
but like Luca Guadagnino does not miss. Fascinated. I need Jack to watch this because like Jack watching Challengers is one thing. Jack watching Call Me by Your Name or Bones and All, or most of his works, it's one thing. I have no idea what his reaction to this would be, but I think you're gonna like adore this film. We'll see.
I'm excited.
But I did watch some stuff this week. I'll just go very quickly that were not new releases. Paul has been screaming at me to watch Fleabag. I don't know if you've seen Fleabag.
Yeah.
So one night we literally just watched it all. We watched episode 1 to the
Yeah.
finale of season 2. Stunning. I'm amazed. I'm amazed by how good the screenplay of this is. Especially season 2. Number 1, I was audibly screaming I had to take a break but after an episode. I was like, I have to like walk around really quickly because I'm like going crazy. But it's wild to see a show that every single creative decision is like the best it could possibly be. There's a joke, and then the payoff to that joke that they deliver is like literally the best payoff you can imagine. Really was impressed by this. Wish I saw this before All of Us Strangers, because I would have been far, I think, more into Andrew Scott in that film. But whatever. And then we're in December now, but I did want to quickly mention for November, I didn't do Noir in November, and I didn't do too deep of anything because I was so busy with new releases. But I did start Nope November, which I thought was such a fun theme, not of Planet Earth November, just a bunch of films tying into aliens. I thought it was so cute. And I did watch some stuff. I didn't care for Superman, the first one from like 1978, I want to say. What I was so surprised by is Star Trek. I watched the first 3 original Star Trek films, and like y'all, I don't love Star Wars. You can go. I think the first one's fun. I'm not a big Star Wars fan. I had no expectations for these films, and I had so much fun with them. The first one's like good. The second one, Wrath of Khan, I think obviously is like amazing. I was like, this is an incredible film. Why is this Star Trek 2? And then Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, was fun. But like I was really actually like excited, and I like these films, and I'm gonna try to finish the original series. No idea if they are good after this. I have no clue. Or when they switched to, I think, the new generation. I've never seen Star Trek. I've only seen the new trilogies. Like I have no basis on if it's supposed to be good or bad, but I enjoyed these, and I just did not expect that. And then I watched The Faculty, which was really good, by Robert Rodriguez. I was like surprised by how much I enjoyed that film.
That's a fun one.
Yeah, it is so fun. And practical effects, what a great proof of concept for the ability of practical effects. Robert Rodriguez, please come back. You were like such a good filmmaker, and now you've just got into like bottom of the barrel like shit, and I'm so sad for that.
He
But
loves his green
alas,
screen. Let him enjoy his green screen, man. In his
I
garage, he's
just
so happy. It's so cheap.
why is Robert Rodriguez wasting his time with like Spy Kids 5? I don't get it, but whatever. Nick, what have you seen this week?
I've seen a bunch of things. I'm actually gonna do it differently than I usually do. I'm gonna go from the newest to the latest that I've seen. Today, I watched because I was feeling like, oh, I should watch something a bit light, heartwarming. Let's just watch Here, Robert Zemeckis. Terrible choice because this movie was not light and heartwarming. This movie devastated me, borderline made me depressed, and I really, really liked it actually. Um, it's which is something I was not expecting. I was like, here we go again. Robert Zemeckis back on his bullshit. Kind of like, oh, let's do something weird. The gimmick, it's all one camera shot. But man, like, this is his tree of life. This is looking at the history of just people and humanity, and also just one family. And it's like Tree of Life meets Boyhood. I like how uneventful it is, and also how incredibly eventful it is, and just the intercutting and the clever transitions that they have. But I just found the story to be very moving in a way that's different from what I read. There were like some people were like, "Oh, this is just Boomer glorifying, his past." I was like, "There's no glory here. You're watching a very talented painter completely abandon his passion because he has to live in a capitalist society, and he has no strength and no vocabulary to actually engage emotionally with what he's feeling and to actually keep following his dream, his art. You have a woman who has ambitions to be a lawyer, who has to abandon all of those to be a mother, forced to just stay home with a child, constantly stopped by her husband from spreading her wings until it's too late for her to actually have a career. This is not the glorifying, like, oh, it was so much better in the 60s movie that some people said. Like, I was reading some one-star reviews, I was like, what movie did you see? Where is this? I don't know, like Boomer diorama or whatever. Um, yeah, I don't want to make a full review. I just really liked it. It really moved me, and I knew it was coming because I was like, with this fucking gimmick, it can only end in one possible way. And still, when the final shot happened, I had like shivers. I started weeping. I was like, oh god, no. Um, man, good film. I'm here saying here is a good film. Fucking weird thing. Anyway, speaking of like very quickly, like 2024 releases, the only ones I did watch were Conclave in the cinema, which was again super fun, like you mentioned. Just sharp. Just I didn't watch All Quiet on the Western Front by the same director. Didn't Wasn't interested in it. Probably will now actually because I thought this was actually really well made, really sharply funny and witty and compelling, but also less of the depressing thriller than I was expecting. It was like, oh, it's gonna be some like Dan Brown shit, as people are saying. It's like, no, no, it doesn't go in that extreme direction. It has a shockingly hopeful ending, which is like, I was like, oh man. Everyone's talking about Emilia Perez. We need to talk about fucking Conclave now as an Oscar frontrunner for if that movie deserves the push. Like let's just push this film. Also with Isabella Rossellini, Little Blue Velvet Connection. Gu gets a very good scene in this. And also shout out to Sergio Castellitto. He's the vape priest Tedesco. I'm not a fan of him. I really don't like him generally in Italian cinema, and like does some international things. He's not that great of a director. Even he's directed some Penelope Cruz films. It feels very random, probably from non-Italians. But in this film, he just owns it. He basically plays the best. Like if our uh, former political leader Matteo Salvini were a priest. Like anti-immigrant, complete racist, conservative. He's basically doing an impression of him, and it's fantastic. It's glorious. So shout out to Castellitto. And then I also watched from this year. Do not expect which I don't know. It's always this thing. Festival films. The new Radu Jude film. Do not expect too much from the end of the world. Is it 2024? Sure, why not? Who cares? Great film. Absolutely great film. 3 hours and not really feeling them. This weird like hangout movie, political satire, um, comedy on filmmaking and the film industry from the point of view of a production assistant, but also the ripples of time of Hungarian politics and women's role in society through the portrayal of an Uber driver slash taxi driver. Like, there's a lot going on in that film. I found it to be very dense, a bit too dense, but that's just Radu Jude. It likes to make very packed movies. But this one was as a fantastic final shot. I will say. I don't know if you've
Bro,
seen this one actually.
no, I have not, but I haven't seen this. I didn't watch his last film either, but at AFI Fest, I want to say like 2018, like did make the 11:30 p.m. showing of We're Not Barbarians or whatever that one was, his
Yeah, yeah,
earlier
yeah,
one.
yeah.
Oh my god, dude. Sitting there for like 3 hours. I was like, what the fuck is this? Curiosity is more modern, his more recent works. But I have not.
I literally was. I was it like, well, yeah. I think it was literally one of those days where I didn't have work. I had like no plans to meet with friends or anything, and I was like fucking those 3 hours of Ratu Yude just sipping a nice tea, and it was worth it. Speaking of like rewatches and some new films that I did watch, um, again I was like feeling more Tom Cruise vibes, so I ended up watching Jack Reacher with the director's commentary with Macquarie. Not a fan of the movie itself. I think it's okay. It's all right. It has a Werner Herzog as the villain, which is very fun. But overall, the film is not great. But it is great to hear them speak about making this movie and how they kept adding scenes up until the last minute. That's very inspiring. Matrix, seen on the big screen, absolute joy, massive, massive treat. I also finally watched In the Loop, the Armando Iannucci political satire comedy from 2009, which has aged very well. If you like British humor, absolutely check it out. The best film I watched this week that wasn't Blue Velvet, that became an instant favorite of mine. It's a movie I wanted to watch for so long. It's called Final Cut, ladies and gentlemen, which is a 2012 montage film, and it's glorious. Especially, it's like speaking as a film editor, also the way that they use over 450 scenes from movies from all over the world and all over the decades to create a compelling classical romance is just outstanding, man. It's so good. It's so good. It's also incredibly fun in the way they intercut some moments and in the way they take iconic sequences and kind of like repurpose them, taking them out of context. Something as simple as Janet Leigh falling down in the shower, in Psycho after she's been stabbed to death, but you just take that shot of her like super sad falling down, and that's like, oh, that's the girl who's feeling sad and lonely that the guy left her or something. It's just like, ooh, it took them 3 years to make it, and you can tell, very sharp. And the last week, which I don't think I've mentioned in any of the previous episodes, but for the past 3 weeks, more or less, I've been watching a lot of On Cinema at the Cinema. Do you know this, Carson? Do you know what it is?
No idea.
Do you know Tim Heidecker?
Yes.
So basically, Tim Heidecker from like the Tim and Eric show is also an actor. He was like in Us and some other films. Since 2011, 2012, he started this web series called On Cinema at the Cinema with Greg Turkington, and I think you're gonna love it. Not only because, like, in terms of like a TV show, they have perfected this format where they actually have, supposedly it's meant to be a review show like Roger Ebert. It's like, oh, at the movies, and we're talking about films, but every single review you can tell they've never seen the movie. It's meant to be this thing where they like say the most generic thing possible based on cast and plot, and then they always give every movie 5 stars. This one gets 5 bags of popcorn. It was very fun. It's like the classic critic that we mentioned earlier, actually. But it gets so complex and so big. And every year they do a live Oscar special, and you can see them like on YouTube, the previous ones. And I actually started watching the one from 2015, and it's so crazy how insane it gets. Like at some point you have like Tim Heidecker fictional version gets a wife and a child, and he names the child Tom Cruise Heidecker. Uh, there's like a quack doctor who gets involved in things. They start making this fake TV show called Becker, but it's a fake TV show. Like it's meant to be a parody, but it actually exists. You can watch hours of this fucking thing. It's like super cheap. Man, people like watch On Cinema at the Cinema. It's so much fun, and also it's just to close things off because I'm talking a lot. It's just very fun to go back in time to like 2012, 2014, and hear these people talk about movies, even though they haven't seen them because it's part of the gag. But it's just fun to be like, Jesus, remember the Smurfs too? Remember G.I. Joe, whatever nonsense, Revengeance that came out, John Chu? Oh, yeah, that was the other thing. Like, they talked about Gem and the Holograms, directed by John Chu, and I was like, what? Like, the wicked guy who did Gem and the Holograms, that was him? It's crazy. It's a trip to the past. But yeah, no, and it's been keeping me company. It's like the episodes of the show are 6 to 10 minutes long, perfect for breakfast, for a quick break, like, watch a couple of episodes. Highly recommend it. I think you would enjoy it. I don't know if this is your type of comedy. Maybe it's like super dry. They take their
I've seen
seriously.
clips now that I see, because I looked it up on YouTube. I've seen like little bits of this on Twitter, and I've always found it funny. I didn't know what it was from, but I found
It's
it funny. So I'm definitely gonna binge watch some of these. I also think the selection of films is like really quite brilliant. That they've like, they review like these tiny little, like they review The Amazing Maurice, which is a tiny little animated film that nobody saw except myself. So like I love that they pick all these like tiny independent film. Like it sounds really funny.
it's
I'll definitely give it a
fantastic.
go.
Especially like since we poke fun at a lot of these people, the like the critics and whatnot.
Uh,
So this was like, yeah, like there was one about Chappie. It was like, yeah, I'm a big fan of the sci-fi and stories about robots. And this one, it was heartfelt. There's some action as well. Also, Hugh Jackman, good as always. So I think this is a good watch. I'm giving it 5 bags of popcorn. It's like the most generic shit
that literally
possible.
sounds like reviews I've seen, so that's good to know.
It kills me, man. It's
Um,
so fun.
that's great. Well, I would highly recommend you watch that, and watch all the films we mentioned. There's so much great cinema out there, and if you need something, always listen to our rapid reviews, and I'm sure you'll find something that's good. Maybe you'll like Here. I love that you liked Here. I love that. Like I genuinely love that for yourself.
I'm
Um,
shocked.
love it. That's gonna do it for today's episode. Where can we find you on social media, Nick?
You can find me on Blue Sky and Instagram at Nickigran97 with updates on everything that I do in film. And also, you can follow me on Letterboxd with links to my YouTube and Vimeo and to check out what I'm watching.
And you can find me on Blue Sky and Letterboxd at Carson Timar. Thank you so much for listening to our start of David Lynch December. If you want this series to continue, if you're invested, go over to our Patreon, or you can go to Spotify and get a subscription through there for just a couple bucks a month. You get a bonus episode every single month. This month, it's going to be our review of Lost Highway. We have Randy from the Uncut Gems podcast joining us for that. It should be a very fun episode. Hopefully, Jack will be there. Here on the main feed, you'll be able to check out in a couple weeks. Nick, we are going to be reviewing Paul Schrader's Oh Canada. So if you were on the Patreon and you listened to our review of Cat People, that's going to be a very fun next step of that conversation, reviewing Schrader's newest film. And then we'll be back on Christmas Day for our review of Inland Empire, which I also think plans change, so you never know for sure. I think that'll be episode 200 of the podcast, which is very fun. So that will be a little Christmas Day treat from everyone here. So with that said, thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.